Welcome, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Digital Transformation Bytes. My name's Brad Fluck, CRO at Interware. It's been a while since we've done an episode. Been off doing the day job of seeing customers and taking people on their digital transformation, but I thought it was important we done another episode soon, especially with AI becoming so much more dominant in the marketplace and a lot of questions around where it fits in with businesses, what use cases could be used. So I've got a very good guest today. I've got Rosanne Werner, who is the CEO of Accelerate IQ. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Brad, for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So you and I have talked quite a lot. We kind of fall in the same sort of spaces, especially on LinkedIn. I think we're both what we'd class as very strong optimists about where AI fits into the world. Both on a personal level and a professional level. But before we get too deep into it, tell me a little bit about yourself. Share a bit of your background and some very big corporate companies as well, like Coca-Cola in your past and that. So it would be good to hear about that. And kind of before we go deep into AI, one of the focuses of this podcast has always been digital transformation as a whole. So it'd be good to hear your views on that as well.
Okay, great. No, thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me. So, yeah, my name is Rosanne Werner, and I run a data and AI mindset and culture consulting company. So we specialize in organizational change and transformation, but focusing more on the human side of how we use neuroscience, behavioral principles to really impact on behaviors and habits that lead to cultural shifts and mindset within an organization. So my background, I'm originally from Sydney in Australia, hence a little bit of the Australian accent in there, but I've been in the UK for over 15 years. I have worked in multiple industries, starting my career at Deloitte to biotech, oil and gas, mining, and prior to starting my own business, I was at Coca-Cola for 10 years. And through Coca-Cola, I led the Data and AI Mindset Culture Program, and this program reached over 2,000 data catalysts across the globe. And it was quite recognized by Data IQ Awards in the Best Data Academy program, and then also the IDC CIO 100 Awards. And you've mentioned about how that shaped my view on digital transformation. So there's this perspective where digital transformation is about the technology, it's about the tools, but when the people aspect of transformation is often overlooked, and if anything, very little invested into building those capabilities of using the tools. How do we help the people through the change, and how do we help them embed that technology in their day-to-day routines? By just giving people a tool doesn't mean that they're able to use it. So that's with this whole digital transformation, the tools are great, but if you don't have the people driving the cars, you don't have the people riding the bikes, the tools will just sit there.
Yeah, and to be fair, so obviously my background, so I work in digital transformation, and a lot of what we do is digital instruction, digital workflows, but the key element for a lot of people is evidential data gathering, and it is pulling that data in. And that's a big part of what we do. And it's interesting to always hear, like, very, very different backgrounds, some similar industries. I work in manufacturing, oil and gas, utilities, infrastructures, are similar marketplaces, but the end point is exactly the same there. Whenever we sit down with a customer and we talk about how to deploy a digital transformational tool into the business, people are key. You've got to take into consideration sort of, the architecture. You have to fit into the architecture, and that could be deploying something in SaaS. It could be deploying something private, or even, on-prem seems to be becoming quite popular again. That's great. And then naturally we can all sit down and work out what the return on investment is, saving on time, money. But like you said, it's the person. If the people don't pick the tool up and they deploy that tool, and it doesn't get the adoption needed. And it's a big challenge for a lot of companies, because that's where a new tool should make their life easier, it should make their life simpler, and it should automate a lot of the manual work we do. So how do you get past that? How do you see the best way to get people? Because it is something that we achieve, but it is sometimes, one of the biggest hurdles we come across at Interware is how do you get that adoption? How do you get people using it? How do you get the cultural shift in a business to use a tool?
I think one of the things that you've mentioned there is that there's so many different changes, and there's this concept of like Martech's law, where you've got this rate of technology that's accelerating at like an alarming speed, but then organizations don't actually change and aren't able to change or absorb that change at that speed. And it's about the way how organizations need like thinking time, how we're impacting like habits and behaviors. They don't change overnight. And it's building those skills and confidence in using those tools, and addressing the fears as well, in terms of the fear of change, the fear of uncertainty, and let alone, being able to change what you were saying about the existing structures and processes. How do we get that cultural momentum? And then also things like, how do you incorporate that in people's core competencies? How do you incorporate the incentives of adopting the tools, and how that impacts their work? So I think it's being really strategic about what you're adopting in the organization, how you bring your people along the journey. Are the leadership aligned with championing that change and kind of instilling that so what to the rest of the organization, so they're bought in? So
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think fear is a good one. It really is. I don't know if that's sometimes it could be a generational thing, especially in operations. And I mean, I look at businesses, it's easy to separate them out into certain areas where I think data has always been a bigger part. If you look at finance, I've been involved in systems like Sage X3 being deployed, and a lot of data goes into that because I think it's an area of the business that automates quickly. I think, as well as ERPs and that sort of systems, CRMs are far more common, and sales teams do it, and you can see the value. And I think that's why we probably see a lot of AI tools being deployed quicker in those areas. Their marketing tools, their finance tools, their sales tools, and that's because I suppose a lot of data exists, and the cultural change in those areas has been quicker. A lot of area I work in is the operational elements of the business. Is people on the front line, it's people on oil rigs, it's people in the factory, it's people out on the roads and the rail who at the moment are still, not everyone, but there's still a lot of Excel spreadsheets. There's still a lot of paper and pen, and it doesn't generate that. So with digital transformation, and it's funny that both of us have got the same sort of experience and same sort of opinion quite quickly on where digital transformation sits. If you start to look at the barriers of AI, and as you know, I follow AI quite a lot, and you definitely see it in more of the B2C world at the moment. There's the big businesses are producing great models. They're moving at pace, and people are using them. And this week, if you went on LinkedIn, there's about 10,000 pictures of someone converted into a Simpsons character, and this because the ChatGPT was just OpenAI have just released another diffusion model for pictures and that, and it's great. But when you think of a barrier for a business, I suppose, what do you see as the biggest barriers? And is our first conversation around the digital transformational barrier then lead into the AI barrier, which is some businesses just don't produce their own data. They don't have their own data. So their only option is to go back to ChatGPT and those sorts of frontier models. And I suppose whatever barriers do you see existing for companies, because you do read a lot, there's not good use cases, not good use cases. There's a million use cases. Anything that takes effort can be reduced by AI dramatically, and then you can focus on innovation and point of authority in business. But you have to take that step. So what do you see as the barriers?
I think the biggest barriers, I think everyone we talked about like just many companies dive into AI initiatives. They want to stay up to date. They want to keep on top of what their competitors are doing, kind of chase that shiny toy. And you can't, like what we said about before about the Martech, or you can't adopt everything. So you've got to be really strategic about what AI initiatives you you choose to pursue, and you start with like, what is the business value? What is the specific business problems we're trying to solve here? And is AI the most suitable for the job? You know, you don't want a, what's that means where someone's using this massive chopping knife for a chopping an apple. And so is AI the most suitable tool for the job? And is it the most cost effective as well? Sometimes people try and invest in AI and there's a lot of training involved, a lot of data involved, and actually the output of it or the business savings or efficiency is actually quite minuscule. So is AI the best tool for the job, or can things like traditional programming or automation be more simple and more cost effective? And then you've got to be careful of, like, what are the high impact initiatives that drive the value, and what are the conscious trade-off, like what to pursue, what to ignore and what to postpone. Because like you said, like if the data's not ready or if the data's not in an accessible manner, then, you know, the whole garbage in, garbage out, analogy will come out. So I think you've got to be really careful in terms of, you know, sometimes, yes, we have a lot of data. Well, it's 90% of the world's data was generated in the last 2 years alone, but more data doesn't mean better outputs of the technology as well. So it's like, what's the quality of that data? What's the relevance of that data to the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah. Is that because businesses aren't producing their data? You know, like I said, that's something I see with pen and paper. And the other thing that I think it amazes me still is how much data is repeated. As in, someone will go out and do a task on a Monday and not put the data into the business to a Friday. So it's not real-time data. And it's interesting, you said about the amount of data created in the last 2 years. You know, is that synthetic data? Is that where businesses can't manage? I suppose one of the key things of using AI is, like you said, is training that data, is fine-tuning that data to make sure it works for the use case at hand. Is that the challenge that businesses have? Is that what the blocker is, do you think, of going from A to B? And I get the other bit, and I try and go in higher level of the use case has to return more money than it's going to cost you to do it. That's fine. But there does seem to be a consistent blocker on even the most simplest of use cases where, you know, basic data could be used, consistent data could be used to make informed decisions. Is that what the blocker is, do you think?
Well, I read like an article recently by the Harvard Business Review, and they listed siloed data as the biggest hurdle to AI readiness. And I think of it as like, so I'm a big foodie fan, right? So imagine AI systems being like a team of professional chefs, and then, like, you know, they're brilliant at what they do, but then they're locked in separate kitchens. So you've got their silos and they only have their own ingredients, which is data. So none of those recipes can be shared, and they can't create a cohesive meal. And then when you think about, you know, having a unified data platform as a central kitchen, you know, have you got the organized, you know, have you got all your knives in the right place? All the, you know, the giant recipe board where everyone can collaborate and foster the creativity and innovation. That's when you can then create, you know, a symphony of flavors, you know. So it's that kind of siloed data piece, which then, to your point, leads to then probably multiple collection of data, because they're not actually aware that it's been collected in a different team or a different function. But then it's also that kind of the data collection methods. Do we have the right processes in place for the people to follow to make sure that they are collecting the data on a more reliable way? And do we have the data governance and data management in place to, when the data is being collected, is there clear ownership and accountability of that data? I think it was really interesting you mentioned earlier about how, like, some of these companies have this tech debt of like outdated legacy systems that aren't actually built for the amount of data that is being, you know, created today, but then it takes quite a long time to maybe integrate the newer tools into it, because we're just kind of stacking, you know, AI tools on a really old system that, you know, that maybe doesn't gel, but they've got that tech debt.
Yeah, no, yeah, and you are right, and again, people moving on from legacy systems is a tough ask at the best time, because again, it's change, and change creates that interest. But there were some interesting points there. Data governance and data collection. That's one of the key things. About consistency of answers. So let's just take basic data. You're doing a process, you're following the process through, and like most processes, it's going to ask you questions. Is it this? Is it that? So what's your name? What's the date? Where are you? What department are you from? What are you doing? Etc. Etc. And it's one of the things that I see, that freedom of text in businesses is still very, very open. Now, obviously what I do is we go out to businesses and we create digital processes for anything from SOPs, O&Ms, fire inspections, walkthroughs, any sort of operational inspection you can see. And one of the options we have on there is multiple choice. And one of the common questions is, why do you have multiple choice? Because there's text. And the problem being is everyone describes something slightly different. Yeah. And the analogy I always use is a bread roll. So even if you go to the UK, just the UK alone, so let's not say we're not a national, international customer, we're just a smaller national company. How they describe a bread roll, where I am from in the Bristol in the southwest, is completely different to how they would describe it in the northeast or the northwest. Completely different names. Now, if everyone in your team answers it like that, how do you get any sort of consistency of data? So that's where things like multiple choice questions, where you're locking down the possibility of answers, gives you that consistency. And it is that the next challenge, that we don't have the data sometimes, but we can create data, we can borrow data, we can buy data, we can feed ChatGPT, maybe feed our data into it and then take it out. But is that the next problem? When you talk about training data, tuning data, has data not been governed in the right way? And I don't mean it's available to everyone. I think the security of data is pretty good in most organizations. But again, if that data is modeled up inside, and it's not even shared, and like you said, is you've got one team in the north, which is one of your chefs answering questions however they want to answer it. You've got another of your chefs in the northwest and they answer it how they want. Is that the next challenge, which is, how do you clean that data? How do you cleanse that data? So if organizations want to use AI to learn from their own specific data and their own IP, is that one of the next challenges?
I would say there's probably there's the processes of collating that data and cleaning that data, and the governance and the ownership and the accountability. I think what I've seen is also, you can have the best processes in place, you can have the best policies in place, but does your workforce have the data awareness, the data capabilities? Do they know how to manage that data as an asset? I know that's quite a term that people use a lot, but it's like, do they know how to treat it with care? Do they know how to, do they have the right habits and behaviors in place in terms of how they enter the data? Consciously, subconsciously, what care do they have when they're entering the data? Are they following the right processes? Do they know where to find the right place, processes are? Do they know what the implications down the line if they enter something, or they enter something incorrectly, or they didn't take the time to collect the customer email address and put abc at hotmail.com? Do they know what the implications down the line is? So, for example, if the field sales teams collect that data at the customer and they don't fill that out correctly and go abc at yahoo.com, when we're sending out the marketing materials, that would go to that fictitious email address. Do they know the implications down the line? Do they know about the quality of that data? How does that impact other functions? And how does that impact the data that other decisions are being made on from other functions? So I think there's the processes and the policy side of things that can clean the data and all that stuff. But if we can influence the frontline workers that capture that data at source and have that awareness and capabilities of doing that right in the first place, you'll be spending a lot less time and resources in actually cleaning it. And you can, you can spend more time in terms of, okay, what does that data tell us? Are we able to read, interpret that data effectively? Are we able to draw the insights from it? And, and the main bit is, are we able to effectively tell that story from the data to really guide the decisions that bring the value? So instead of like cleaning up the data, we can focus on all the value adding stuff.
No, and you're right. And again, so like I said, I suppose it's like I said, is you can do it, but it's an expensive joy to have it cleaned up. And we've all done it. We've all done it in small sections, like when you change CRM system in a small business, and you take out your CSV file from one, you pop it in the other, and you can just see all the holes that exist in it. But I think that's it. I think what you've said is a really good point. Did people miss AI coming? Machine learning has been around a long time. It's been sold into various different market sectors, legal, for e-discovery, and those sorts of things for a long, long time. So consistency of data has been something. But do you think some businesses missed that, and data governance hasn't been really driven, maybe over a 5-year period? And now it's coming to that point where the cleaner this is, and the better this is, and the better data we have now, the more efficient we are to take that next step. So is that something maybe it's being missed in businesses, and now suddenly it's becoming that stage where we have to spend a lot of money now? Yes, we have a lot of data, but like you said, rubbish in, rubbish out. So there's a lot of money to be spent on just a preparation stage to go to that next stage. Do you think that's a challenge?
I'm not going to lie to say, I think the development of AI has shone a real spotlight on data. I think data, like I said, data's always been there, and there's always been like this thing that's been growing and that kind of thing. But I think AI has really shone, going, okay, where are all the holes? If you want AI to perform well, your data needs to be of a really good quality, and it must be the relevant data for you to be able to realize the value out of the AI. So, and I think that's the AI is getting a lot of attention at the moment from leadership, and they can see the benefits of it. But you need to have a good foundation with that data before you can get the actual results from the AI, and that's kind of helped with that data governance management. That data message to go, well, you need to sort your house out before the AI comes.
Yeah, sort of foundations out before you start putting in the conservatory. Yeah. And it is interesting. So it's interesting to speak to you. And I ask these questions because your knowledge of data is far better than mine. Mine's at the front end collecting data and that sort of thing. And I'm a big AI fan, but it's just interesting to hear kind of I suppose the challenges a lot of businesses have, which in the press and when you read things, it's like, oh, you got some data, you go to AI, and there we go. The job's done, everyone's happy, we move on. It's not that simple. So coming away from data, but even though every question is going to be data driven, I'm sure there's a lot of advancements happening very quickly. How quick we've gone from GPT-2, GPT-3, and now how quick we've accelerated to that. And I suppose a lot more models get a lot more attention now. You've obviously got Grok, and various other ones that are getting a lot of attention. And Hugging Face has made open source models far more obtainable to people, easier to download and work with. What do you think of the best advancements that we're seeing, and how do we see those advancements, I suppose, migrating into the business world over time? So not just people going on there and creating fancy pictures and fancy CVs and that sort of thing. How do you see that migrating from what exciting things you're seeing, and then how you can see that amplifying where we are in the business world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I must say, I think businesses need to ask themselves, what are the business outcomes they really need they want to see? What are the key we've got all these metrics, but what are the key metrics that we want to measure that aligns with that strategic goal, and then find out what that type of AI project or AI technology that we need to implement. I think I think some of the older AI that's been around for quite some time, that's also shedding a light on them in terms of people are a bit more aware of artificial intelligence and what it can do, and it's having that curiosity of the possibilities of what that can do. And but I think it comes back down to what are the key problems to solve, and where are the big high value where the high value initiatives that will bring that value back to the business. Because I think that's also really important, how we build the confidence of the workforce as well. So you can, what we're talking about before about having the tools, but if you need the tools that are doing great things, but you also need the human capabilities up at a certain level to really unlock that. So I think you've got to think about what are the key business outcomes you want to achieve, and then tackle those ones first, and then make sure your people are on board with that journey to really unlock that.
Yeah, I think that is. I think it is. It is finding those right use cases for businesses and those sorts of things. How do you see, like, as time goes on? I'm a big. I think maybe because I work in an edge environment, so maybe that's where I lean. I see edge AI being a big thing for the future. So obviously, private models. So as models, most models get released, and you got your smaller version, your medium version, your bigger version. One of the things I'm very interested to read recently is, even in business and in personal life, is something like 80% or 90%, I forget what the exact number was, of requests of an AI model could be managed by a small standalone model, and it doesn't need a frontier model. Now, you and I know the cost of running a frontier model is huge. The amount of energy it uses, the amount of water it uses, and I like to think about the planet as well. Now, in my environment, where I look at AI for the future, and where we've got frontline workers benefiting from insightful data, insightful answering, maybe using something like agents for planning and those sorts of things. So I see edge AI being a big part of the future. And from a security point of view, it's far better for a business as well, because that model then is contained on that tablet, that phone, that desktop, whichever it is. How do you see businesses evolving? Do you see all these corporate licenses being forever and a day with ChatGPT and Microsoft, and companies will spend however much it costs to have one of these gigantic enterprise licenses forever? Or do you see it evolve into businesses maybe using our data, maybe taking open models, edge models, and then bringing that together and then starting to run their own ecosystem? I don't know if that's a good word for it, running that internal system. How do you see it progressing over the next 5 years? I suppose 5 years is probably too long. Over the next 12, 18, 24, 36 months?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's a good question, because I mean, what I've been seeing when people are going through even just the Copilot launches or a enterprise ChatGPT is the biggest question I get asked is, what do I put in the system? And I think when we think about it, this whole curiosity piece of, how do I formulate what's in my mind into the machines, and how do I formulate what I want the machine to do, and prompt it, the whole prompt engineering stuff is probably a really key barrier or fear of getting it wrong at first. And I think and that's where I've seen in terms of, like, people are just kind of that initial breaking through how to use the prompt, how to use their prompt engineering to get an initial output out of the system. And I think that's probably a key thing I'm seeing in terms of how do we break through that first? How do we build that curiosity of what we can ask the AI to do? How do we then critically think about the outputs of it in terms of embedding it into our day-to-day workflows? And before we even go into agentic AI and all that stuff, I think the masses I'm seeing is how do we break through that initial what do I put into the system, and how do we break through that first, our Copilot doesn't work because it doesn't come out with what I want it to do. But actually, have you reiterated your prompt? Have you shared with others in terms of what are the best practices, what are the good use cases, what are the experimentations that you've got out of it to kind of break through that? Okay, let's try again. Let's be more curious about what this machine can do. Can we be more creative in terms of the prompt and what we can get out of the machine? So I think that breaking through that then allows us to then go, okay, what are the use cases that really bring the value back to our teams, and what's the efficiency that comes out of that? So I'm probably thinking more like, how do we help the people now to really break through that initial barrier to then really unlock the opportunities later on, that creativity later on.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good point. Yeah, and I think whichever style of model they use, do you think prompt engineering is that next stage of keeping data clean? Because it always learns, doesn't it? Whatever you ask it, it learns. So obviously, if people do start running private models, and I think they will run private models, I'm adamant on that. I'm a big optimist on edge and private models. So then obviously the only thing your model learns from then is what people put into it. Yes, you can have more data. Yes, you can put more data in, fine. But if you can teach ChatGPT, if it's something completely random that only maybe something regionally you would know, if you ask it once or twice, it will pick it up next time and it will answer it for you. And that's simple because it's token in, token out, but it does remember that sort of thing. Do you see prompt engineering as that next stage of, if businesses do run models and they run an AI function that helps? Maybe it could be a chatbot on sales, chatbot finance, it could be a supporting bot for operations teams. People will want to move into this kind of market sector to learn, because there is a certain way of asking these models to get the real value out of the question. It isn't sometimes just two line, two sentences, and then get it. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's that prompt engineering thing. That prompt engineering isn't something we've been brought up at school, right? And that's probably something that, and that's something that I see as like a skill set that is so crucial these days, because like you've got the AI there that can do so much stuff, but it's only as good as how you prompt it. And like you said, people might start with like a line of a prompt and then wonder why it hasn't come out with the results that they need. But then when you learn from either like learning materials or speaking to the others, and it's like, okay, well, have you put the role in there? Have you put the task in there? Have you put the outputs in there? Or have you told it? I've got a list of do not use words because I don't want ChatGPT telling me something's of a tapestry of life, things like that.
I'll take a deep dive and everyone on it. Take a deep dive. No one can ever use that ever again now, because that's AI. If you say those words there, that's just AI. And people used it before, but they can't anymore. I agree with that. Yeah.
And it's what you're saying about like how you train the model to start sounding like you. So for example, a company, how does it reflect their values? How does it reflect their communication style? How does it reflect how they approach things and that kind of thing? And so like, communication for example, you can have the same message, but how you communicate it to the supply chain teams could be a lot different than how you would communicate that same message to the commercial teams, for example. But training the model is to have that kind of domain expertise and the insights that the engine wouldn't have normally. So how do you build in things like, how do you build in some sort of that empathy of how certain companies would deal with certain customer problems to an extent? I think you still need that kind of human judgments for those really complex grey areas. But I would really like to say, though, when we're building the modules based on our own data, we need to be really conscious about whether we're feeding any of our own bias into the models, and I think be really conscious about that piece there, because then if we're feeding, I mean, there's so much bias in the internet and the LLMs, open source LLMs already. If we're feeding it our own data and our own ways of interpreting things, we're really conscious in terms of, are we inherently building our own bias into this model? And that's where you need the diverse teams to make sure we've got a full representation of the data. Are there any groups that are misrepresented? How are we testing the algorithms? How are we testing the logic? So do we have a diverse feedback loop? That kind of thing, to make sure that we're not building a supercharged, a bias model of, of the people that are building it. So I think there's two ways to think of it, in terms of, yes, you can build something that's quite bespoke based on your own data and your approaches, but I think we've got to be conscious of the bias that we could be subconsciously building into these models.
Yeah, so there's a few things there, and I think we'll come on the bias, because you've known from my LinkedIn posts in the past, bias is one of those things that really, really irritates me. And it's an unavoidable thing, but it's something that we have to, I think, like you said, it's how you go forward with data, but we'll go on to that next. But I think it is interesting, like you said, the prompt engineering, I think it's an interesting one. Just as amazing how many people in the UK don't say put into English, not American English, but into English. So you get all this text coming out, and there's Z's everywhere where there shouldn't be. It doesn't spell color correct, and it's like, even if it doesn't use one of its elaborate start offs, it still sticks out like a sore thumb. But before we move on to that, another thing that interests me, and I think it will affect businesses. It already does. I've read countless posts on LinkedIn that AI companies rejecting CVs because the person who's applied for it has used AI. Now, I'm a massive believer in AI. It doesn't replace humans, but what it can do is it can automate manual tasks dramatically. So I think human creativity, and from a business point of view, human in the loop as far as authority, which is, it doesn't matter what the model's told me, it doesn't matter what the data says. Effectively, a bit like the old problems they used to have with sat navs. If it's taking you down a road that doesn't look like a road, don't follow the sat nav. Use the common sense should kick in then, and that's what people sit in with doing. Do you feel that that's the right way to approach it, or do you feel that people should be able to use AI now, because effectively the menial task of writing a CV, it isn't the data that's gone into it, it's the fact of what you've done, what you've achieved, what you've done. So I'm interested in where do you see the cutoff point of people using prompt engineering to, maybe in education, maybe applying for jobs, and in different areas, more of a person to a business, or a person to a person? Do you see that as the right approach, or do you feel that is something that should be frowned upon, which seems to be the general feeling?
Yeah, I went to a conference the other day, and one of the key themes that is using AI cheating, and I'm like, well, AI is a tool for us to use. Like, why would you? I mean, there's this report called the Gallup report, right? And it's like saying how 13% of the workforce is engaged, which is creating a productivity gap. So this is like being engaged about getting up in the morning, doing what we love, and having that kind of fire in your belly to be engaged at work. Only 13% of people are engaged at their work. And so when you see what AI can do in terms of what are the repetitive tasks, what are the mundane tasks that it can do, and have that free up time for the things that gives us that fire in the belly, gives us that time to be curious, time to be creative, time to spend with our families and friends. Is like, why would you not use the machine that can do things quicker, more objectively, and it allows us to like unblock that right of thought. It helps us to go from 0 to 1 so it's like you can have a blank page there, and just that ChatGPT or AI model can help us go, well, brainstorm and start with something. Why wouldn't you use it? It's like when the calculators came out,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
it's a tool to help us, do things better and do things more quickly, and why would you not use it as a tool? And I think I might get alternate views on this, but the whole AI in education piece, if we're not teaching AI in education now, the generations that come up and going to graduate and they would be asked to use AI at work. Why are we not prepping them with those cognitive capabilities in terms of how do I translate what's in my mind to what the machines can do, and focus on the skills that AI can't replace. I know on my LinkedIn post, I keep going on these soft power skills, but these are things that are unique to humans that AI can't replace at the moment. So what, I was just having a chat with my mum this morning about how, how can AI can help doctors write, reports and
Yeah,
stuff like that. And then scientific research shows that more time doctors spend by patient's side and have that bedside manner, they're more likely to stick to a treatment plan. So
yeah.
why wouldn't we use AI to help doctors take the grunt work of writing reports and all that stuff, so they can focus on things that actually save lives? So I mean, I'm like, I mean that's
No,
a piece where I'm just like, yeah.
I think what it does is it closes the gap, and what AI does is closes the gap between something you don't understand and someone maybe does understand it. Someone's been to university and college to understand it, and then suddenly, if you understand the right prompts to ask, and some people consume information so quickly, you can accelerate the gap very, very quickly. And that's exactly it. I think that's one of the key things. And I think reading a lot of reports on what the future for medicine and healthcare is, what the future for space exploration is, what the future for curing most of the major issues we have, both from disease side of things and economically, and then also obviously the environment. And now AI will help us close those gaps and accelerate those gaps at such a speed. But yeah, even to the most basic things, I'm exactly fair. I think getting AI to write your whole CV or write a whole report and not editing it is maybe a little bit criminal, but it can give you an insight that you wouldn't see, and it's more an objective view to that. And yeah, I agree exactly. I think it is that generation now. And again, coming back to education, an odd system. Education's always confused me, which is I always have that picture, which is just a group of animals, and it's a monkey, it's a crocodile, it's a lion, it's an orangutan, it's an elephant, and there's a giraffe. And said, well, we teach everyone the same thing. So the test is climb that tree. So yeah, is a crocodile
Yeah.
going to climb the tree? And that is what our educational system is generally like, which is it's a straight line. Everyone does the same, and some people adapt to it marvelously and do very, very well. Other people struggle to adapt to that structure of education. It doesn't mean that person has any less value than the other person, in my opinion. I think what AI will do is help people to do that, but what it will do in the future is adapt education to suit the individual. So
Yeah.
you can train it to suit the individual and the challenges those people have got, or the way they learn, or even the subjects they learn in. And I think that'll be a massive, massive, massive plus for generations to come. And I think it is right in what you said. It's like I said, it's why wouldn't you give the next generation now? Everyone's at school AI training because it's adaptable. That the fact that coding's going to change, the way we program's going to change, everything's going to change. So you should be given that acceleration, but it's not. It's not at the moment, which is a shame.
Yeah.
All right, coming away from that, we mentioned the word bias, and I think we should cover that off before we close off. So my frustration with bias, as you know, when you look at a lot of the big models that are produced, whether it's Google's, Amazon's, Microsoft, OpenAI, whoever produces that model, it very much links to the political opinion of that company. We've seen that in the election. We've seen it with, if you search certain things up, it lent to the side it wanted. Grok 3 is then being criticized for going the opposite way, and that's a little bit different. So what are your opinions on bias? is it impossible to get something down the line? And again, is something down the middle of the line based on the opinion of the people? And the other thing that frustrates me is we've gone through such a media-driven world for a long, long time, where media is so biased as well. You
Yeah.
kind of come out and think, well, this isn't person-driven, this is data-driven, and it still leans one side or the other. And I suppose the big question then is, like you were saying before, as we train data for our businesses, whether it's not even cultural, whether it's not geographical, can it just become opinionated on based on how you perceive it if you're the person training that model? So forget the
Mhm.
cultural side of things of it. If your opinion on how something is done is that, it doesn't take in consideration that the person sat next to you may do it slightly different. The
Mm.
person sat on the other side of you may do it slightly more efficient. So,
Mm.
so yeah, that's kind of my little bias explosion. How do you
Yeah.
see bias in the general, and then how do you see it affecting businesses, and how can businesses maybe find a way of challenging it as we go forward?
Yeah. I I think I think we haven't been aware of what the data that's being fed into like open sources at the moment. In terms of, I think there's bias in terms of you've got the gender bias, racial bias, but then there's also that language bias. It's like it's like, you know, doctors are male, like that kind of doctors are male heavy, and nurses are female heavy, teachers are female heavy, and I mean, just recently, just past International Women's Day, I was doing a bit of experimentation. I was like, well, women in STEM, right? Or roles in STEM, and I used 3 different models. And I was like, give me a image of a civil engineer, give me an image of a mathematician, give me an image of an actuary. And all 3 models, obviously, all 3 models trained on different data, and whether it's old data, relevant data, and they all came back with men,
Yeah.
and men with beards. So which is I thought
Yeah,
that was
both of
quite.
us going to sell here now. We're not. Neither of us going to do well. I've got a bit of stubble. I haven't crafted the beard, and you're not a man, so we're struggling. But yeah,
And so
what you're saying is 100% right.
and so then you're going, and it's not just, I guess, identifying the bias in the AI, but I think we also need to be that critical thinking skills of not just taking outputs of AI as the truth. And coming back to your point about the whole CV, that kind of thing, and just taking it out and using it, as we got to be raise that kind of education piece on, if you're building models, what data you're putting into the models. Is it biased? Have you got a diverse team that can provide feedback on whether there are any groups that are represented there? But then also building that critical thinking skills of, is this right? Are we missing something here? You know, should we use this as the truth? You know, so it's having that critical thinking, analytical skills of what is coming out of the AI, and then you know, if you've got the ability to change how things are being entered, built, categorized, that kind of thing, then and you know, make sure you've got a diverse team with it. But yes, I think the AI, the bias piece is like, oh, going where the model's going into the future, that's going to be trained on data of existing models. And the, you know, so do we have this supercharged bias models in the future? What can we do with that? So is it that, I think it's an education piece of the people that are building it, testing it, and then also the education of the people using it. And like, and you've got the human in the loop, but you've got the human judgment at the end as well, in
Yeah.
terms of you know, whether you just take the outputs as it is, or actually, no, actually this isn't right, like, how do I tweak it? How do I tweak the prompt to make sure it's being conscious of the bias that it's showing? So
Yeah. And how do we? I can see how we come back to the prompt engineering conversation we had. That's how you control that from the business. And to go more grander and go a bit more holistic, can that be controlled? when you think of ChatGPT, if you think of Grok, if you think of just you and me sat in our houses on an evening, I can type with freedom. You know, if I've got a certain point of view on life, then that point of view is always going to show in my view. So from a business point of view, both from, like you said, I think it is, you've got to take a very, very wide spectrum of input when you train something, because two heads are better than one, three heads, you know, that's phase. And then obviously it's the way things are viewed. So I think you can control that longer term. And I think it is a longer term thing, because you can get away from, you know, a lot of companies are heavily biased in the male way, and that's going to show in the data, because most of the data these models have been trained on was everything that was online originally before the new synthetic data. So that's what it's going to represent, and you know, that's a shame in itself. You know, being a father to a daughter is a big shame. It's not the way it should be. But how can is there a way of controlling it? And it's not an answerable question, because it's more of an open-ended question, because you don't work for Google, you don't work for Amazon, and it's, you know, it's not the way. But is there a way that we can change that in the more, you know, is it school education? Is it the way we approach how AI is used? And does AI suffer at the moment from, it's a way to create funny memes, it's a way to create images, it's a way to show funny pictures of Donald Trump doing something with Barack Obama or Putin, and that's is that the child's view of AI? And if we don't hit it, like you said, that right point, will that ever change in the mainstream?
Yeah, I think like what we can change like now is the education side of things, and that awareness. How do we the output of AI, how do we fact check it? How do we, you know, what do you use to fact check it? Have we got like fairness checks in place in terms of the standards that are in place of the outputs of AI? Are we sharing these use cases and say, look, this has come out, and are you aware of these biases? I know we talk about conscious bias, but it's also the unconscious bias that we need to bring people aware of as well, and that we don't take the bias from AI and it then, you know, triggers our unconscious bias, and then it ends up in an even worse situation. So it's kind of, and then I think the whole diversity, inclusiveness also works there as well, in terms of if we got different perspective in place, are we creating a safe space for everyone to voice their opinions and voice their concerns if they're seeing bias? So, you know, if I see a bias, you might not see, you know, do we have a safe space to talk about it openly and what we do with it? So I think these are things where, I know we're not going to change the system overnight, but these are things that we can start building into the workforce and then, you know, in the education system, and being aware of it and what you can do with it in terms of shaping views and fact checking. Like, what sources do you use to fact check? You know, you don't fact check it with Facebook or Insta data. You know, like, how do you fact check with real data?
And that's the thing, and that's one of the biggest models. But you look at Grok, completely trained on X. You know, that's where it generates its data. So how can you use that as and it's exactly the same. You know, you look at the llama, it's trained on Facebook, it's trained on Instagram. You know, that's where it collects its data from. And again, you know, you think of the random views. But I think it's very interesting, and you know, this is quite a deep subject, so we won't go too much further into it. But it is, and you know, for gender, for social, and for, you know, around backgrounds and that sort of thing, I think it is quite an important part of the education, because I think if you educate people in that way, that education will go into the work environment. And I don't always mean just so, you know, people can become that warrior for that, but everything we've talked about is consistent. It's consistent of data, it's consistent of answers, it's consistency of opinions. It's taking that wider spectrum. So if you educate people on how to get the best long-term out of frontier models then as people start to work into a business environment and then they start to use AI to improve working life, it will be the consistency of data, the consistency of questions, and the consistency of answers coming from a more non-biased model. And that's in so many different things. Like, you fix a tire this way, but then the person who's training a model takes 10 times steps more, or does it in a non-safe way, and then that's never realized. There's so many different things with bias that can make it. So I think it is a really good point that if we educate early in all the different aspects of bias, I think that will be how it rolls in. I think it's just one of those massive challenges that the AI faces, because it is trained generally on a very biased environment that we've had before it. Well, before AI and frontier models. But to finish off, to come away from that quite a deep subject, that a lot of people, like I said, we talked about prompt engineering. Is that a way to educate people? A lot of people are looking to move into this. A lot of people would say they want to move into software, they want to move into SaaS, they want to move into digital transformation. That's kind of being rolled into, I want to move into AI. If someone younger or someone who wants to change careers now looking at this and thinking, like, I'd really love to move into this, what advice would you give them? And I suppose, what piece of advice would you give to, I suppose, anyone or any business on their digital transformation journey?
So I'll start off with the individuals. Build a continuously learning habit. Like, constantly be curious. Like, you can build your technical skills, but I think the recent report of the half-life of skills is like between 5 years to 2.5 years. Every 2.5 years, your technical skills are out of date. So continually build your technical skills, but then also pick the ones that are relevant for you. There's so much out there, you don't want to get AI fatigue through it all either. So pick the ones that you want to build over time. Be curious. Build those resilience and adaptability muscles. So it's AI now. What's the next emerging technology? So you're building that investment of your adaptability muscles for the next emerging technology. But then I always go back to the power skills, which are like your soft skills, which become so much more important when so much is getting automated now. So much AI generated materials out there. People are craving that human connection. So how do we build those human skills that AI can't replace? The empathy, the emotional intelligence, the creative problem solving that connects different dots that AI can't really understand, the whole nuances or the contextual awareness just yet. So how do we leverage off like people's domain expertise and connect those dots in a creative way? But it's a whole emotional intelligence, like communication. How do we communicate and collaborate with others that AI can't do at the moment? And that's cross collaboration piece. And then on the business side of things, I was like, look, technology is changing so quickly. You need to invest in your people. They're the ones. I was at a conference the other day, and they're saying we're in an era where the users are driving the adoption, not the tech giants. So invest in your people. Do they have the capabilities? Do they feel safe to test and fail forwards and learn from it? Do you have the safe spaces where people can collaborate and learn more? Like how you would prompt engineer is different from how I would prompt engineer, but when we share about it, we learn twice as much. So how do we help people in like a social learning perspective learn more with less effort, because you're sharing best practices? So I think individuals is like build those learning muscles so that you're future proofing your skills going forward. And for businesses is like, do you have the collaborative space? Do you have the tools? Do you have the capabilities program to help the people on that journey?
Yeah, and I would echo that as well. I think that's very, 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 very good advice. And I think it's such a cool place at the moment as well, the way you can learn. So, digital I knew, data I knew, and that sort of thing. But once AI started, you learn about a neural network, you learn about a large language model, and then you start to learn about the nuances and how things change. And there's so many things you can use now. YouTube videos, great. So many cool YouTube videos you can watch. There's so many good people on LinkedIn that are sharing, very, very small courses which have impact. And I think that's such a good way to, and it is amazing how much it moves on. And it is a lot of skills that we all know as well. Like before we came on the call, one of the things I was going to talk about was reinforced learning. And
Yes.
reinforced learning has been around forever.
Yeah.
That's effectively is how you train a dog, they would say, and things like that. So reinforced learning in AI is the next stage in that sort of thing. And reinforced learning is very easy to understand. 2 and 2 always makes 4. So if you, long as you teach that and AI, and again, if you just understand there's so many cool things you can learn online now. So it's easier, I think, for those people. And I would agree completely. If you just keep, there's so many good podcasts out there as well that you can listen to where, people who are in the coal face of AI every single day, just translate it into an easy to understand thing. So yeah, very, very good advice. And again, I would definitely say that the human in the loop is very important. How people approach it, how they put empathy on it, how they use their different skill sets to translate what's happening is very, very important. And I definitely agree with organizations. They have to move forward. They have to take this on. Workforces are the future of this because they are the people that will benefit. They are the people that collect the data. So yeah, no, thank you very much for that. And I think that does us for today. I think it's been amazing chatting to you about this. I really enjoyed it. And to be honest, we could probably go on for another hour quite easily. There's so many different things that we planned on talking about. We never got the diffusion models, image models, multimodal. We could have talked about so many different things and how they apply to businesses. But thank you very, very much, Rosanne. I really enjoyed it. I hope
Thank you, Rod.
And I think the last thing to end on is if anyone wants to reach out to you, anyone watching this wants to reach out to you, how can they get hold of you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. I share hints and tips on data and AI habits on a daily basis. I'd love for people to kind of get involved in that discussion and what can we learn from each other. So connect me on LinkedIn. Love to hear from you.
Excellent. Right. Well, thank you very much. And Digital Transformation Bytes will come back at some point. Thank you very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.